On today's episode, the podcasting evolution and revolution. I'm Jeremy Fisher. This is The Awakening. You know, I'm spoiled. If I decide in the next 5 minutes that I'd like to watch a random movie, let's say Hearts of Darkness, the documentary film about the movie Apocalypse Now. Yes, a movie about a movie. All I have to do is hop on Amazon, buy the movie in one click, and within a couple minutes from now, I can be watching that movie. That's new. Movies didn't ever used to make it out of the theater and into our homes until the VCR came along and let us watch them at home. Now VCRs have gone the way of the dodo, and it's all about streaming movies on demand. The same goes with music. If you want to hear any song, literally any recorded song at all you have to do is head out to the internet and buy it, and you'll be hearing it within minutes. But what about AM talk radio? Is that on demand? Well, it is now, thanks to podcasting. In just a few short years, the number of people listening to podcasts has risen from tens of millions to hundreds of millions. Communicating ideas over audio is a new and dynamic world that's changing thanks to podcasting. But podcasting is a little different from movies and music. Because with podcasting, you don't need any instruments, you don't need a movie studio, you don't need a big budget, you don't even need a camera. All you need is a microphone and a computer with internet, and you and I can hear each other talk from almost literally anywhere. Podcasting has only been around for over 12 years, yet it's quickly becoming the most consumed type of media in history. According to which study you read, it's estimated that over 300 million people are regular podcast listeners, and that audience grows by up to 25% year over year. People are ditching the 5-minute-long ad breaks and limited listening windows that exist in traditional talk radio. Today we can pause shows when we're pumping gas, binge listen to multiple seasons. We can even download them and take them where no cell reception or radio waves would ever reach. Though there are over 500,000 podcasts, I personally believe the podcasting revolution has only just begun. Podcast networks are being created, which are helping organize podcasts. New podcast players like CastBox that make podcast listening easier are coming out every day. Podcast growth doesn't seem to have any end in sight, which is a fantastic advantage to you and me. I think that podcasting today is where YouTube was 10 years ago. And if you got on YouTube 10 years ago, you'd be a small voice in a sea of voices then. But you'd be a much bigger voice today than someone else just starting out on YouTube. The same may happen in podcasting. Your 500 podcast subscribers today might be 500,000 in 10 years, which would make for a very profitable podcast. And speaking of profitable podcasts, let's take a second and talk about how podcasts actually make money. Because I don't think a lot of people understand how much money podcasting can actually make for some people. How much money? How about millions? The most common way podcasts make money is through advertising. That's nothing new. That's the way TV and radio folks have earned their income for decades. The good news is, though, that podcasts don't typically have to be crammed full of ads like traditional radio in order to be profitable, because the typical podcaster has much, much lower overhead costs. A $100 microphone, a laptop with internet, and a $15 per month hosting subscription to Libsyn is all you need. Everything else is free software or editing that you can do yourself. I personally edit this show. I record it, I edit it, I add music to it. What it costs me? $15 a month. Podcasting is an incredible thing. You don't even have to sell the ads yourself. Sites like AdvertiseCast create a marketplace where you can list your podcast in a searchable directory where advertisers can book ads for your show automatically. So what kind of money can a podcast really make? Let's say you're able to gain around 10,000 listeners to your show. Now, That's not an easy number to reach, especially for a new podcast. This is one thing that's important when we start talking about these numbers. Only 8% of podcasts ever have a large enough audience to attract advertisers. That's today. That may change as the podcasting movement grows. But if it's like most things, that number's only going to get smaller. Because the barrier to entry into the podcasting world is so low, a lot of people are entering it. Which means that it's much harder to stand out. You and I have talked in past episodes on how you could potentially hack that model and stand out among the crowd. And we'll spend more time diving deep into that as well. But for now, let's get back to the numbers. Let's say 10,000 listeners to your show. You'd be selling ads based on something called a CPM, or cost per mile, or cost per milo, cost per mil. It's got a lot of different names, but the basic term is CPM. A CPM is one fee per every 1,000 listens. So with 10,000 listeners, you would sell 10 CPMs because there are 10 thousands in 10,000. You're welcome for me doing that hard math for you. If you sell one ad at the beginning of the show called a pre-roll and one ad in the middle of the show called a mid-roll, and at say $20 per CPM to keep the numbers quick and dirty, you'll gross $400 per episode. More or less if you have lower or higher CPM rates. More if you have higher CPM rates, more ads, or more downloads. There are some podcasters that have $200 CPM rates because they convert on sales really well. So the shows that have millions of downloads, like the Joe Rogan Experience or Revisionist History, they're making millions of dollars. If they only get 1 million downloads per episode, which both of those shows get far more than, but let's just say 1 million per episode, and they only sell one ad, which, by the way, they have a lot more ads than that, but let's say they only have one ad. At a $20 CPM, they're making $20,000 per episode. One episode per week would be over $1 million per year. Again, they have multiple sponsors, multiple ads, and multiples more than just 1 million downloads per show. They also have teams of people helping them with their show, producing the episodes, selling ads, and stuff like that. So they're going to have more overhead than the average person because they have staff, but still much less overhead than a traditional AM radio station. So that's the top 1% in podcasting. Few of us will ever reach that number. So what about you and I? What about the person that doesn't really have a huge audience already, and the likelihood of getting a big audience within our lifetime is the same kind of odds of winning the lottery? Let's talk about an idea where someone with no audience, no content, and no podcasting experience can create a podcast that would be profitable from the very first day. There's an opportunity in the world of podcasting that hasn't quite been tapped yet, that listeners like you could take advantage of. We've talked in the past about how partnering with someone that already has an audience is one of the best ways to ensure that you have a higher chance, as a nobody, to get eyeballs on your site and ears on your podcast. So let's take that a little further. One thing you could do is to reach out to popular bloggers that don't yet have a podcast and offer to narrate their blog into podcast form. So you'll do all the work, organizing, planning, narrating, and recording this influencer's blog posts. Yet you'll release it under their brand and under their name. And in exchange, you'll split the ad revenue that the podcast creates 50-50, or whatever number you can work out. That's very similar to what I did with Pick the Brain. And it's one of the reasons why our podcast was profitable from day one. PickTheBrain.com gets millions of visitors per month, and a big chunk of those visitors converted to listeners, which grew our podcast at a much faster pace than the average podcast. You could do the same with an existing blogger that wants to repurpose their existing blog content in a new way for their readers to consume. Often bloggers spend 10 or 15 years building content that gets buried deep within their site for no one to ever read again. And a lot of that content is referred to as evergreen, which means even though the article was written 5 years ago, it still applies today. Offering to repurpose this content into audible form and releasing it into the new media world of podcasting could be an attractive offer that you can pitch to an influencer. Depending on how much time you want to invest in this idea, You could put together a demo episode and send it to the influencer to give them an idea what the show would sound like. And this doesn't just have to apply to online bloggers. People that have YouTube channels would also be a target for this as well. As long as their quality doesn't fully rely on video, you might be able to convert a lot of the audio to podcast form, which will give them another outlet to attract an audience. Now, if you're able to work out a partnership, you could communicate to the influencer how profitable the show could actually be. So you'd say, basically, if your site gets 2 million unique visitors per month, and just 2% of those visitors start becoming podcast subscribers, you'd have a show that will have 40,000 subscribers. 2 ads at a $20 CPM from 2 different sponsors per episode would make the show earn $1,600 per episode. And if you did 3 episodes a week, the show would gross just under $250,000 per year. So your cut, if the deal was 50-50, would be well over 6 figures. Not bad for content that you didn't have to create and your influencer doesn't have to do anything with other than lend you the brand. That's the kind of deal that I like to call a win-win. Something to keep in mind when we're talking about reaching out to someone who already has an audience. The key to getting this to work is that you make it easy for the influencer. They're already busy as an influencer, and they are used to people pitching them on things all the time. The only chance that you have at them even considering this proposition is that you make it very clear that it will be profitable and easy for them, which means you're going to need to do 95% of the work, which is fine, because if it's profitable for them, it'll be profitable for you. There's no real limit to how many times you could do this either. Since there are millions of bloggers, the market of people that you could pitch this to could be pretty large. You might even want to start a business that reaches out to influencers that want to convert their online content into podcast form and connect them with other people willing to put together and narrate the content for them. And you get paid a percentage of ad revenue or just a one-time fee for the setup process. Ultimately, you could have a blog to podcast company that you build and facilitate these relationships with. There are several ways to structure this type of concept. All it takes is a little creative thinking on how to organize it. No matter what happens in the world of podcasting, it seems like the opportunities are just beginning. Adopting the strategy that we've covered today might be one that will work for you. Either way, just by listening to this show right now, you're already a part of the podcasting revolution. And if the past is any indicator, it looks like the podcasting revolution has only just begun. For those of you that are considering getting behind the mics yourself, I say, there's no better time than now. That's it for today's show. You can find more information about how to start and grow a podcast at theawakening.com. If opportunity doesn't come knocking, let's build a door.